Good evening, everybody. A very warm welcome to Kaizen Central from Manufacturing TV. A delight, as always, to see so many people joining us for this weekly conversation, which we like to carry out, as we say, in the spirit of community and collaboration. I need to make a kind of declaration of interest in what's about to happen, perhaps not declaration of interest, but a statement of intent. I occasionally get ribbed by one or two of our regular members for perhaps seeing the glass of manufacturing as being less than half full and not celebrating the very excellent things that are done in this country. And I'd just like to say that I think it's important that we understand the problems and challenges facing manufacturing, as well as celebrating, but we can't build on a platform that we identify as having flaws. And I think that perhaps explains some of the impetus behind what we as Manufacturing TV and many of us in Kaizen Central want to see happen in terms of trying to change the climate around manufacturing. Now, as part of that, the discussion has to be around the way manufacturing operates and the way that manufacturers manage their businesses. It covers everything from training through to finance and, as we shall hear tonight, ownership. Nick Russell was one of the very early people to attend Kaizen Central, actually, in the very early days. The reason I'm wearing this rather loud and I should call it celebratory shirt is that I think, and somebody is probably going to correct me because you're better at stats than I am, I think that this may be our first anniversary. So there we go. I'm wearing a summer shirt to celebrate. Nick Russell, there was something about, I think it was his LinkedIn self-description that caught my eye, because it says building a British Mittelstand. And I thought, wow, there's somebody who's actually putting nailing their colors to the mast of building the kind of company that has been so successful in the post-war years in Germany, mainly family-owned businesses, with a long-term view of the future, with training and staff at the heart of everything they do, and slow but solid growth, as opposed to the much more dynamic but much more dangerous short-term gains that our friends in the City of London like so much. So allow me to introduce Nick Russell. Nick, a very warm welcome to you. Great to see you here, and thank you for being with us and the gang. Perhaps you could just tell us, paint a very quick picture of what you do, what your businesses are, and how you got there.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for to talk this evening. So I'm the chairman of a small group of businesses. So we have a business called Dentsu Group up on the north coast of Scotland, 9 million turnover, 65 people, historically focused mostly on the defence industry in the UK, but we're broadening our product portfolio to address commercial and industrial opportunities and also some large scale energy storage opportunities. So that's where the journey began, really, back in 2014, when myself and my business partner, Derek, who's the FD, we led a management buyout of that business. And it was one of those management buyouts where it was, we're going to shut this business. If it's cheaper for you to take it off our hands, then great. So we were able to, walk away with, with all of the business, really, without a financial investor. And at the time, we thought, okay, 6 months in, we're going to need to raise some money to support the growth of the business. But we were able not to do that, partly because of its location up in the northeast of Scotland. It's supported by Highlands and Islands Regional Development Agency. So they put some money into the business in the form of grants and a deferred loan. And that really gave us the runway to get into cash generation, profitability, and we've kind of crawled forward from there. So the first few years were quite painful because we did need, there's lots of opportunities. We wanted to grow, but we really had to focus on cash flow. And then more recently, we acquired a business in Cambridgeshire, so Prima Electronic Services. So it's fairly standard contracts electronics manufacturer. So it's now about 7.5 million, 60 people. And the reason we acquired that business was that we wanted to find innovative ways to fund Dentsu. So Dentsu, there's a lot of investment in product development. So particularly in the defence industry, it's a long business development cycle, long product development cycle, expensive. So difficult to fund just from incremental growth in sales from legacy products. So as we've been looking around, CEMs, contract electronic manufacturers, were part of our supply chain, and it kind of struck me that it's a fairly kind of old-fashioned industry. Yet yes, there's a few, maybe 10 to 20 fairly modern businesses in the UK, but most of them were fairly old school, owner managed, local focused. So we thought, well, if we could acquire one of those businesses, we should be able to scale it fairly easily just by applying some sort of fairly basic business principles. And so through kind of discussions with a few organizations and kind of pitching the whole kind of Mittelstand philosophy, we found an owner who wanted to sell and was quite happy to defer some of those payments to enable us, again, not to take on an equity investor. So obviously we had to raise a lot of debt, secured against the business, remortgaged the house, borrowed a bit of money, all that good stuff that keeps you awake at 3 a.m. in the morning. But that's paid dividends now, so that business is growing. It is going to be the kind of source of cash for the growth of the rest of the group. And hopefully next week we'll be able to announce another small acquisition, which is kind of semiconductor R&D, and probably another slightly larger acquisition a few weeks after that. So where we are now is a kind of a small group of engineering and manufacturing businesses, and we want to kind of grow that over the next few years, as Nick says, to create a UK Mittelstand.
Nick, I mean, it's a great story, and I love the fact that the company who owned Dentsu in the first place, they just wanted to close it down. And I guess you could have had a kind of, let's see if we can, pump this up and spin it out and make some cash out of it approach, but you didn't. You decided to stick with and be loyal to the people there and the community, because it's quite a remote community up there in Thurso. Tell us a bit more about that and about what motivated you to do that.
Well, through my kind of career, I'd been involved, with a few businesses, and I'd been involved in businesses that had been bought and sold a couple of times, and the whole kind of, positioning in a business for sale, I found quite exciting and quite enjoyed that process. So that was always a potential route for us post MBO would be to build a business and then to sell it. But I kind of found myself in this position that I'd always wanted to be in, master of my own destiny in terms of, owning and, being the MD of a business. And when I kind of looked at the team, I thought, I'm in this position because I had certain attributes to be in this position, but I couldn't run this business without the support of the electronics engineers and the guys on the shop floor and the guys in the warehouse, etc. And actually, the only reason I got this opportunity is because somebody many years ago had put this factory in this community, and various owners had underinvested in that factory because the owners that came next thought, well, that's a ridiculous place to put a factory, and so did the owners after that. So it started to decline. So I thought it would be a little bit churlish of me to take that opportunity, pump it for a few years, and then either move it south, which makes absolute perfect business sense, move it nearer your customers, nearer where you can employ people, etc., or just to sell it. And along with reading around, and particularly Tom Brown's book was a lightning rod. I thought, you know what, I'm going to build this business for the long term, and eventually we want to kind of evolve it into some sort of ownership model that is a kind of mixture of maybe some regional ownership, in the same way that local government own small percentages of firms in Germany, some element of employee ownership and some element of trust, and with the underlying objective that whoever owns the business has to invest in it for the long term and not on a 3 to 5 year cycle, which is so common in other ownership models.
That's really, really interesting, and I just wonder if at any point part of you said, these ideals are wonderful, but not having those ideals might pay the bills a bit quicker and make life a little bit easier. I mean, it feels sometimes like you've been crawling over broken glass to get to your holy grail.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So, I've that thought has come up many a time. When you've been getting an ear bashing from a customer, or a key supplier fails to deliver, or one of your kind of star employee prospects decides to move somewhere else. Yes, that thought has occurred, but actually, it's for me, it's about legacy. I could cash out, I could make a few million, I could go and sit on a beach, I could do whatever, but I'd like my sort of legacy to be, we've created an exemplar model of here's a different way to do things, and I know lots of other people are doing lots of other similar sorts of things, but here, future generations, here's another way to build a business and own a business and structure it, and it's not all just about building it and then kind of cashing out and looking after yourself and a few people close to you. There's more to life than that.
Yeah, I was going to ask if the sort of the way we do business in the UK, particularly around the paucity of patient capital, and I know that Ewan, as he's driving, will be nodding his head as he listens to this. But the fact that the game tends to be stacked against ambitions like yours. I was going to ask that question. Of course, you have not, apart from personal debt, gone into, you haven't had to go out and seek city financing to make your way. That is correct, isn't it?
So, yeah, so not equity. So we have a lot of debt. That's how we've funded the growth of the business, and that's certainly how I acquired Prima. So I mean, Dentsu doesn't really have that much debt, so just normal invoice financing now. But with Prima, we raised a lot of debt to acquire the business, a fair amount of which has now been paid down. But debt is our mechanism to grow and certainly to acquire new businesses. But we've actually found, so we've been working with one of the new sort of challenger banks, Secure Trust Bank, and they've been great. So we've been working with them for about 6 years now. Flexible, great kind of service. We can sit down and talk about what it is that we want to do, how we can make it happen, and they've been very supportive.
So that's interesting that you mentioned the challenger banks. So the city does get an awful lot of flack, at times, and for the wilder edges of the city, I think it's probably justified. But I'm just wondering whether you found the challenger banks a little bit more open than the main high street banks, and whether the banking system generally, in your view, is not necessarily geared towards the kind of long-term funding that you need.
Absolutely. So it's great if they can secure the debt against an asset. Great if they can see a fairly short-term return on that investment. But where there are challenges, if you take property, for example, or facilities. So, with both businesses at the moment in our roadmap, we're going to need to move into new facilities, and it's quite a big step. particularly if you want something that is, not just a big warehouse with a small office on the end of it. So that is a challenge, and also, for the more expensive capital equipment that doesn't necessarily have as fast a payback, that is also a challenge. And you can see in lots of businesses around the UK where people have kind of grown their businesses to a point, and that next step is such a big step that they kind of just plateau out at that point and think, this is enough for me, and I'll carry on with it, or this is enough for me, but then I need to sell it if the business is going to fulfill its potential, and that's a real shame.
Okay, anybody who wants to make their own points or ask questions of Nick, either use the raise hand mechanism or wave frantically in my face, and I'm sure I'll be sure to spot you. You talk about that plateauing out, Nick, as if that it's almost like running a long distance race or a marathon and running out of puff at the 20-mile mark. You need to have enough in the tank to see you through. And is working that out an issue for you? I mean, is that part of the quite complicated planning you have to do in order to make certain you don't sort of, as you say, plateau out?
Yeah, well, to be honest, that's the fun part for me is figuring out that puzzle, and we've not got to the point yet where we've plateaued out. What I would really like to see is some more engagement from government. So if I look at, so we're about to acquire a business in North Wales. So we've had lots of conversations with the Development Bank of Wales, and they're very supportive about how they can help propel this business to the next phase. The same in Scotland. Highlands and Islands Enterprise and Scottish Enterprise are very much engaged. We don't have that same sort of arrangement in England, which I think is a missing link in the financing ecosystem. And inevitably, that's where private equity comes in. Of course, it's the money is there, but then of course you have to give away equity, which is fair, obviously. But then the destiny of the business then becomes linked to the exit strategy of the new investor.
That's obviously, having read Tom Brown's book. I know Ewan has because he recommended it to me, and I know you have because you brandished it in front of your webcam this morning when we were having a chat. Tom is very critical of the PE industry, and he's our guest next week, so he'll be telling us more about that. As I say, he's critical of the wilder fringes where there literally is a cut and thrust, what used to be known asset stripping motivation. But there are actually private equity companies who can shake up moribund companies and actually keep them going. So I don't want to give the impression that we're all down on PE totally.
No.
But it is inevitable that if you're going to bring in a PE partner, you're going to have to surrender some control of your destiny, isn't it?
Absolutely, and there are a small number of sort of new breed PE organisations. So if you take Business Growth Fund, for example, that was set up post 2008 recession as part of the kind of goodwill from the banking sector to invest in the SME sector. And we've had a few conversations with that team over the years, and they have a slightly different philosophy in that it's an open fund, so there's not a fixed time for when the return needs to be made, and they seem to be much more flexible. And I think there are a few others like that around, but there's not enough of them. So in terms of that patient capital, so we need to invest on a 10 to 15 year time horizon. There's not enough of that around at the moment.
I obviously spent a few minutes just discussing perceived shortcomings of the financial sector, but the reason I think that, yeah, people might say, well, why have you got Nick Russell on here? Everybody wants to grow a business the way he does. Well, the fact of the matter is they don't. Ownership in this country, we have a different view of business ownership in many parts, I would contend. I want people to jump in and either challenge me on that or support that, and say that actually somebody with that same vision as Nick's got and has developed is quite unusual in this country, and that if there were more like that, then perhaps the tide would start to move in the correct direction. So somebody jump in here, please, and help out. If Ewan wasn't driving very noisy, he can hear me. And Ewan, good evening.
Good evening, and I'll apologise if there's any background noise. But Nick, absolutely fascinating, and congratulations on what you've done to date and on the journey so far. An evangelist, and so much of what you're saying, I'm absolutely wholeheartedly support and echo. I'm going to say I'm slightly different sort of. I tried for a number of years to lobby the British Business Bank to set up a long-term patient capital fund, and got sort of pushed from pillar to post from them to HM Treasury, and sort of trying to get government support and then institutional support to actually look at developing something which was what the old precursor to the 3I, the ICFC, was originally set up to try and do. Because I think access to long-term capital, and when I talk about long-term capital, particularly for manufacturing businesses where it's longer than 3 years and it's longer than 5 years, unless you've got a property, most conventional banks won't lend you any sort of money, unless you've got security or a property to lend against it via a mortgage. So what I've ended up doing is setting up a variation on a theme and something called the Succession Fund. And its key focus is very similar to, on the face of it, to what you're talking about, which is business owners who want to keep the name above the door, who want to look after their people, but who don't necessarily want to sell out to private equity, because private equity has a reputation for buying it and keeping it for 3 years or 5 years and then selling it, and they can't take the business to public market, and they don't want to sell to a trade buyer. And the philosophy behind it, pretty simply, is if we own the asset here in the UK, then you make the investment here in the UK, and therefore the jobs are created here in the UK, and the apprentices are developed, and the graduates are developed, etc. And I think it's great to hear what you're doing, and I think there's a plenty of opportunity for more like it.
That sounds great, Ewan. And as you were talking, you kind of reminded me of quite a few other conversations that I have with people in my network that are on slightly different journey, in that they're people who are in kind of technology startups, hardware startups, where they in particular get to a certain point where they've accessed Innovate UK funding, they've had some maybe an angel investment or whatever local UK investment, and they kind of get to a point of proving the technology, kind of doing most of the de-risking, and then they're faced with this, the valley of death in terms of investing in the capital equipment to manufacture whatever the product or technology might be. And then that's at the point where private equity often swoops in, but often it's not UK private equity, and businesses get swallowed up, maybe continue in the UK for a year or two, and then it all gets taken offshore, and then another country will benefit from that manufacturing employment that comes after the science, after the technology has been created, and when we miss out on all of that employment.
Talking of employment, Nick, what's been the attitude of the workforce, most particularly up in Scotland, but also in Cambridgeshire, to your philosophy, and do you communicate it with them? Are they aware of your ideals and the way you want to take the companies?
So we absolutely do communicate it, and I don't want to oversell it, because there are elements that we do quite well, and there are elements that we don't do well enough at the moment. So we are still on a journey. But certainly the kind of management teams buy into the philosophy. They like the fact that there's stability there. We last year, as we kind of came out of our kind of reactive looking after the cash phase with Dentsu in particular, now we're building a 5-year roadmap as a first step, and quite a large number of people in the business are involved in that process. And some of them talk about how refreshing it is to be able to take a few days out of the office and to think about what needs to happen in their area of the business over the next 5 years to achieve the strategic objectives that we've set. So everybody through that process knows where we're going and can see the kind of work packages or the elements that they need to do to help us achieve that objective. So I think as that process matures, it's going to become sort of quite powerful in motivating the teams.
Good. Yeah, I would think so, because I have to say that there must have been a time, was it back in 2014 or whenever you did the MBO, when the people there must have been wondering about whether they were going to have a job the day after tomorrow. Anybody?
Yes. Yeah.
Sorry. Anybody else want to parlay some of their own experience? So, Richard, you had your hand up at one stage, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Crystal Doors winning the Queen's Award for Sustainability. I knew my company was worth about 2 million and a bit. We had an offer on the table from a company that wanted to buy us 5 million. It doubled the price. Should I have just sold up and walked away? The answer is the opposite. It's absolutely for the customers. It's for the employees. Crystal Doors, on me passing away, it's in a will that it become a trustee. The rise of the cooperatives is growing rapidly. A lot of companies are management buyouts that then become a cooperative, which then does give the value. That is the difficulty I think we've got at the moment, is a lot of businesses have bosses, owners for the lifestyles, rather than sort of thinking I'm a responsible person who's actually looking after a community, looking after the employees, to the extent that I've turned it upside down. I'm a servant to my employees, that I provide them the best well-being, the best tools and the best skills to be their best. And for me, for any new investments and even small investments like the t-shirts, is I'll tell my management this is what I want. The management then translate that into English to the employees, for the employees to say exactly what they want, and they then come back and say this is how we want to have it implemented, but then they own the changes. They are the driving force. So no longer have you got the top telling down, you've now got the bottom up driving forwards. And obviously when you've got 35 employees all passionate, it makes a huge difference. So I fully understand, Nick. The other one that I've done, which is even more radical, is to be able to give back more than I earn. So our company purposely spends more on the community, supporting other activities, charities, whatever it may be, greater than the value that I'll earn. And that once again underpins what it means to be a responsible owner of a company, as opposed to me thinking, oh, I've got a company, I can make money for myself at the expense of others. For me, wealth is what you give back, not what you take.
I've written that down. That's a great idea. I'm going to steal that one. Thanks.
There's quite a lot you can steal. The other one that we've just recently done, because of the way that society is working at the moment with furlough, no cash business now, zero. I will not accept cash to be able to buy our doors. We won't buy anything with cash. I want that transparency of where you've got your money from. Our industry it used to be, and it still is, it's full of cowboys. It's self-employed people who are fitters, who then fit kitchens. Can you do it for cash? The answer is now zero. I won't even take any of the legitimate invoices with cash. The other one that we're doing is the end of this year, we're pledging and we're supporting our customers. Already we've closed the door on all our suppliers. No carbon footprint, no pledge, no business. Simple as. The times are changing for the environmental shift. And for me, that is the only way to do it now, is to say you're part of our community of wanting to be part of the solution, or you're not. And therefore we're changing. Instead of everything's about price, it's now about value. To do with the long-term planning, absolutely, 100% back you up, Nick. So many companies look at this. Does it pay back in 3 months? What? Does it pay back in the year? I've got a dust extractor. It'll pay back over 25 years, and it'll last 25 years. The cars that I've got, the 2 EVs, they'll pay back over the next 5 years. Happily paying back now, actually. But it's about value now, no longer. But if you look at China, China did from the 1980s, knew full well they're the cheapest in the market, and it was rubbish quality. They've got the quality up, and now they're dominating the market. The one that I look back on in history is Hiroshima. The Japanese have become the best in the world because what they did of the people that did survive, they said, we're now planning for our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren. And that's the reason why Japan is such a successful country, because out of the embers of what was left behind from what the horrible Americans did, they've built over 30-year plans, 60-year plans. And that's where the small businesses and the family-owned businesses have got those ethics, that it's not about how to make a quick buck for today. What is the purpose of life? That's where it boils down to me. And that's where that difference is. We're getting a completely new generation coming out of the schools and colleges. And I'm sure there's a lot of people on here that work with the schools and colleges. The young students of today get it. My parents were, you have a job to survive, you do what they tell you. Then you've got, my generation is, you need a job, you can make great money. Now we've got a generation saying work-life balance. They've got it right. They are the emotional people are saying, what is the purpose? Where do I get my happiness from? I ain't going to slave over you for you to get your money. What is it that you're offering on the table? And this is where the manufacturers have got this game changer of an attitude to change of our perception. How do we make ourselves look amazing? Crystal Doors is still in an embryonic state. I'm not there, but it's about how do we then sort of say, this is the value we give you when you come to work for us. This is what we give back to you. This is why you should be passionate working at our company. And that's when you get the game changer of the company is successful to the benefit of everybody.
That business model, Richard, it's the inverted pyramid. Timpson's, not manufacturers, but Timpson's use it right across the board. And if I had a hero or heroes in business, and I have many, but John and his son James Timpson are absolute embodiments of what, to me, responsible business is all about. Simon, good evening to you. I'm trying to guess which part of the world you're in. Are you in America or France?
No, I'm actually I'm in France. I'm in the Alps. But I'm going to talk about America. For those that don't know, I live in Washington, D.C. And one of the things I find very frustrating, and it's come up many times in these Thursday evenings, is the lack of long-term angel investment funding availability in the UK. And it's something that is not an issue in the US. There's so much angel money available in America that there are now dedicated angel groups whose very specific goals are related to long-term manufacturing. And so they are genuinely angel money, i.e., the second money that comes through the door after your own. And they are accepting, in fact, they're targeting companies with business plans that say, this is a 20-year payback. This is a 15-year payback. This is we've got no assets right now, except for the ideas and maybe a little bit of intellectual property. But we've got a management team and capabilities, et cetera, that can turn this idea into a manufacturing thing that in 20 years' time is going to be more than worthwhile investing in. We don't want private equity. For all the reasons that we've talked about. We're not interested in selling the company in 3 years' time. We won't be anywhere near what we're worth in 3 years' time. If we're going to sell the company, it's going to be either for an absolute shed load of cash because someone has recognized the long-term value, which is exactly what Richard said. Someone comes along with an offer today, the probability is that it's based on the value today. Well, that in most cases is not the value of the company. Unless you've been in business for 50 years, in which case it may well be the value of the company, but that's a different question. But this availability of angel money in the US makes just an enormous difference, because it gives the entrepreneur the opportunity to present their idea to people who are going to be open to the idea that it's not going to pay back in 3 years' time. And those are people who've got the ability to write the checks to get the thing off the ground. And I just find it so frustrating that the UK, for whatever reason, and of course it's a combination of reasons, seems not to have that. And it clearly makes a huge difference. That's the only point I was going to make, Nick.
Yeah, well, I mean, this whole issue about price versus value, I mean, that's very much at the heart of the mission statement that I presented a few weeks, gosh, I think it's a couple of months ago now. But it is about whether we in this country are so focused on price, and that means cash, pound signs before the eyes, rather than deep-seated value. And what the mission statement was talking about was the fact that our politico-economic system is very much based on a price rather than value judgment. And that's how it's been going for decades. And no wonder that there is this kind of, what can I get for it mentality. I also think that because we're an island, we've been a nation of traders all our lives, for centuries. We've gone out and traded or stolen. But it's all about what can I get on the deal. Whereas countries who have neighbors and borders, and they learn to deal for the longer term, because if they screw somebody over, they tend to send an army and bash them over the head for it. So I think it's part of our semi-piratical nature as a nation, that we've grown up like this. I feel free to challenge on that. And I know there are so many exceptions. I note that Bob has kindly put in the chat box, he's written about Chris Ray at AES and Hugh Ford at Gripple, two absolutely exemplary company owners who have who stand for everything that Richard and Nick have been talking about. In fact, Hugh, I don't think actually owns Gripple anymore. I think he gave it lock, stock, and barrel to the workforce. And Gripple is a quite remarkable company as a result. Any more thoughts? Who wants to chip into the conversation? Mr. Murphy, good evening to you, sir.
Good evening. I just wanted to ask Nick. With his companies, do you work? Are your companies unionised at all? And do you work closely with the trade unions? And if you do, how have they been supportive?
No, so neither business is unionised, so we don't have any interaction at all, really.
Okay. Sorry. Cheers.
Well, you raise an interesting point, because we never really discuss unions on Kaizen. The situation hasn't arisen. I actually wrote to the TUC a few weeks ago to see if we could get somebody along to find out what the perspective is in the trade union movement these days about manufacturing and all of that. Has anybody got any experience of working with trade unions, positive or otherwise? Mr. Howard.
Yeah, I always think it's we were talking before, so I think most people know I work for Airbus, so and I've got German employees in my team, and it's always interesting when we talk about the Mittelstand and that kind of aspect, and then look at all of the regulation around employee rights in Germany. And I'm not sure I understand it all fully, but and I don't know whether it's a cause or an effect or what, but I mean, yes, the employees are heavily involved, and the unions appear to have an awful lot of power over even what I would call relatively minor decisions, like I decide I want to employ somebody, and the Betriebsrat have got to approve my selection, and they are allowed to veto it and say no, but they've got to give reasons, etc. So I don't know, how it works fully with German smaller companies, but certainly with the bigger companies, the unions. I don't say that they run the companies, but their influence creates for me a huge amount of bureaucracy in the bigger companies for sure.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. That the workers' councils is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
That sit on boards effectively. They're held up as a kind of beacon of enlightenment and all of that, but it doesn't always work out that way. In day-to-day business.
No, I mean, a good example for me is that all of our communications from management to the teams to the staff are often held up because the workers' council have to approve everything. So the people get upset because they find out from other sources, because we're waiting for approval from the works council to say what we should be saying directly to the employees. So it's a tough one.
I just want to pursue that thought a bit more about the Mittelstand, and we put the German model on a bit of a pedestal, as we all know, but it is fair to say that the Mittelstands who have been so dominant in the post-war era are actually beginning to lose some of their mojo, because the families, it's the thing about the family ownership model, is that it doesn't necessarily, but it can so often lead to dilution of power, influence, and so on, or a fracturing, shall I say, a splintering of power. The only company I know in this country that is aware of that is J.J. Churchill in Leicestershire. They have done brilliantly in managing family succession, and they are a model, if you like, of a British Mittelstand kind of company. Steve, sorry, you put your hand up, and I just blathered on over you.
No, don't. I just wanted to ask Roy. But obviously, I can see clearly. I've worked in Switzerland with sort of regulations that make the Germans look like rank amateurs sometimes, well, with the complexity of them, your tax is done by your village, because your village tax might be different to the next village's tax. It's crazy. But do you not get any advantages from this sort of level of union? I mean, it's always going to be swings and roundabouts. And at the moment in the UK, I think the unions could be, and I'm not a great union fan in many ways, but I think at the moment they could be an incredible force for good. And I've spoken casually with shop stewards and said to them, I'm running this continuous improvement activity. Why haven't you been fighting for this? Because this ultimately is to the benefit of your members. If they want to move on, they're more highly trained. If the company does well, they keep their jobs. You tongue in cheek slightly, but why aren't you guys fighting for this? Why are you fighting for an extra 10 seconds on the fag break, where you could be guaranteeing the succession of the company, the quality of work for your members? Slightly tongue in cheek, but I think in this country They could be a huge force. And they were with the Japanese. The Japanese was Jap crap. And in the end, the deal that the Japanese did was to say to them, you do everything we want and you get a job for life. So all these ideas run out of steam. But I just think in the UK at the moment, particularly within manufacturing, they could be a force for good. And like Nick says, or Barry said, we can't even get them to turn up at a 6 o'clock meeting.
Yeah, I mean, don't take my comments wrong. I fully agree with you, Steve. I think done the right way, and there are definite advantages to having that involvement in some aspects. But you know, I tend to come across the difficulties more than the advantages. But yeah, I mean, I think having that voice that's reminding you of what's maybe in the minds of the staff is good, but you can achieve the same probably the way Richard and Nick do in their companies by getting out of your office and going talking to your staff. It's obviously a bit trickier in bigger companies, but it's an effort that we're trying to do in Airbus is kind of retrain all our managers to behave in the right way so that flow of information goes backwards and forwards.
Okay, thank you.
Barry,
do you
good
think...
evening. Oh, sorry, Nick, please, you were just about to pick up on that. No, go for it.
Sorry, I was just going to say, and it's a question, I don't know the answer. Do we think that the values of the unions in, say, Germany and France and Switzerland are more aligned in general with, say, the values of governing parties? And has that been part of the problem in the UK, that there's often quite opposing views in how we want to develop the economy from government versus unions? So it's more of a tension in that relationship than perhaps in other parts of the world.
I have a view on that. It is that actually unions, modern unions, are somewhat split internally. They have a political wing, and they have a day-to-day business wing. And very often, the day-to-day business wing can be very, very sensible and very productive and very, do a great job working with enlightened managements. It's just that, the occasionally almost crazy political antics of some of the union leaders completely undermine the image, the good image that the more professional business-facing side of the unions have. And I think that's down to what you were saying about the political allegiance, the fact that unions have for so long been aligned with the Labour Party. It has meant that there is kind of an automatic turn their face against the Tories kind of image, while at the same time, the business-facing colleagues within the same union could very happily be dealing very constructively. I remember the saving, and sadly it's since gone, but the saving of the Michelin plant in Dundee was all down to union cooperation and a very enlightened HR director who turned it around and made Michelin keep it open. As I say, sadly, it has since gone. So that efforts, and also when I think it was when GKN was being taken over by Melrose, I think the unions played quite a constructive part in trying to support the efforts for making it as least uncomfortable as possible. Barry, I'm sorry, you had your hand up a moment ago.
Yeah, no, just to come back on the last few things, I think it's very much a British culture, and that's us pushing water uphill. Unfortunately, you've got a unique group of people on here and companies that you've mentioned, but the British culture isn't one for progressive. We're a mature industry, we're a mature country. Unions were great through the growing boom years. And now we're ready for a step change, and the culture's got to be ready for that step change. We don't recognise unions on any three of our sites. Our engagement has gone through the roof. I've ensured that I've removed all the snipers and terrorists, because That's what takes the business down. You know, you do argue over the coffee. We'll let the staff discussion. We have staff discussion groups. We don't need union groups. So we are very transparent. All of our goals, our profitability, every penny is up on boards in every single work cell. So, you know, we've got complete transparency. Every area knows what the goals are, the objectives, the strategies for those areas. Everyone's got alignment. And we found the engagements super high. That transfers to an NPS score to the customer of 86 currently. And you've got Apple sitting at what, 52, Netflix sitting at 64, and you know, we're sat at 86. Why? Because we empower people, and then it passes on to the customer, which then passes on to value. You know, it's about treating people the way, you know, we want them to be treated, but the way being open with them about what we want in return as well. The UK, we've got rubbish at difficult conversations. We don't have difficult conversations. We have compromise and work rounds and, oh, we'll meet you halfway. Well, at times you just can't meet it halfway. It's not commercially viable. You know, so just very open and straight around that, really. And what else did I write down? Culture, transparency, and engagement. And unfortunately, you know, the UK's got a choice, and we need some stronger leadership. You know, Carrie really does have to step up, you know, and make some stronger policies. So
you're referring to Madame Antoinette. Yeah, it's we've got 10 minutes, 9 minutes left. We started so positively with Nick's story, and then we've been analysing some of the issues that perhaps get in the way of there being more people prepared to you know, take some of that load that Nick has done in order to create something of terrific value to everybody involved in those businesses. It was something that Steve said a few moments ago. He was talking about running, I think it was Steve, talking about running out of steam. And Barry's just been talking about the fact, you know, that we're quite a mature society, economy, industry, and so on. I'd like to take this for the last few minutes back to the beginning almost. Well, if there is a feeling that things are running out of steam, how do we get more people to have the kind of energy, commitment, and involvement that Nick's got, that Richard has demonstrated in spades this evening, that Barry's been talking about? How do we get more of that real magic juice that works, that engages and, you know, really encourages workforces to feel part of the solution and not part of the problem, and to generate true wealth for our country? Because I believe fervently, that our sector is capable of delivering all of this. But sometimes I think we feel we're in the weeds and we're looking down at the weeds. We should be, you know, looking at least at the treetops, if not at the stars.
That's where you come in, Nick. You know, it's we've got to change the narrative. So, you know, certainly when I was growing up in the 80s, it was all about, okay, success is, you know, someone starts a business or goes on some other kind of journey that leads to, you know, large accumulations of wealth, and then they can, you know, live happily ever after. And you know, we've got to change that narrative by, you know, creating more stories, more examples that are out there for people to see that there are lots of different ways to do things that don't all involve just making loads of money.
Richard.
I think it's what Nick, myself, and Barry have done, which is what's called disruptive transparency, which is to actually evidence to everybody, to publicly make aware this is who we are. We have a moral compass. These are our values. These are our principles. This is our vision. The global companies, the ones that are the MBOs of, you know, they want to just get and make some money. You know, the asset stripping of the accountants, they have no value really for people and planet. Where what we're saying as a small group here is we're willing to sort of put on the table, this is who we are, this is what we're about. We're empowering our employees. We're wanting to bring better design and better products. We're spending our money in the right places, R&D, and back to the training and the skills and the assets of our company. And once you make it evidence for everybody to see, we're starting to see that shift in the customer's awareness. If there's two products on the shelf and one of them's green and they're both the same price and they sell the same, 78% it is now. 2 years ago, it was only 12. People, the consumers, are having enough now of saying it's not good enough. Now is the time to really push forwards, which is the reason why I'm putting the amount of effort in that I am doing. Is it's so easy now to get ahead of the greenwash, of the people who are just looking at the money. Business models like Apple, every year can you buy some new products? They'll never be sustainable. Amazon, £2.5 billion new building. It looks green. It's not green. It's made out of metal. It's made out of all the rubbish things. They're not willing to evidence the things behind them. Everybody knows of what they're throwing in the bin because that hit the news. What they're not willing to show is the amount of stuff that they throw in the bin that doesn't meet standards when it comes in from China. There's a lot hidden by the big companies, and it certainly is. There's a lot of companies out there now that I want to say, look, we've been doing this for years. We've been doing this for generations. That is where we need to be, is that game changer.
I think you've just provided me with a new hook to hang some, at least a story or two on, Richard. Disruptive transparency.
And a few politicians.
What? No, we don't talk about hanging politicians on this show. Okay, final thoughts. We're 4 minutes away from Malbec time. Who's got some final thoughts to throw on the table? Roy, I'm going to put you on the spot because you've worked overseas. Roy Spencer, you've worked overseas and you've been in business a very long time. You've been listening to all this. What's your judgment on it?
I think there's a big cultural issue. If you look at the culture in Germany, where I've worked and I've presented to workers' councils as a business consultant, it's kind of more orderly as a society, and there are expectations set. So if you look at the smaller businesses, that is Bestand, the people that actually work there, they've actually been trained by that company. They've served the right kind of apprenticeship. There's the relationship between the educational establishments and the businesses, and it's not just banking. It's the whole scheme of things. And they talk about different ways of progressing. So people have academic routes, and then those that are more practical that go along the what's it called? It's Zweite Bildungsweg. There's it's more organized and it's a bit more planned. It's a bit conservative. You don't see sort of the same flashes of brilliance that perhaps you see in Britain. So there are, it's just more ordered and more sorted out. And we've got to get a bit more orderly and link things together, because we don't. And we rely on individuals. And what I've heard this evening is all about leadership. It's just, people like Nick and Richard actually showing a model of leadership and being very open with people. I've got a slightly negative story. I had a business in Russia, and it was a knowledge business, and I made these 8 people that I started with as partners, and then 2 of them walked off with a chunk of it, and they never quite recovered from that. So it's not all good, but it's about leadership. But that's to do with Russian culture, and that's what we need to engender. And somebody talked about stories. It's the stories that you tell about business that actually have the major impact.
Oh, well, okay. Well, that's us sorted for the next few years then. We've got some good stories to tell, and the more stories, the better. And you made an excellent point there, Roy, in my opinion, about the fact that, yes, we said earlier, we put a lot of what Germany does on a pedestal, but actually there's more IP and patent applications in this country than there are in Germany. They're very good at doing things. We're very good at creating and inventing, and those flashes of brilliance. If we just got a little bit more orderly and a bit more long-term and a bit more culturally aware, as Richard has been saying, and just attuned ourselves to the times, I think there's nothing to hold us back whatsoever. So with that very positive thought in mind, I'd like to thank Nick Russell very much indeed for being with us this evening. Nick, thank you so much for coming on. I hope you join us next week as well, if you possibly can. I know you're very busy, but Tom Brown is going to be here. And I know that it'd be great. You really enjoy to hear what he has to say. And to all of you and those who contributed, bless your hearts. And I think that the time has come to say goodbye and see you all again very soon. Take care. See you on the next Kaizen Central. Goodbye for now.